Everyone thinks they know Malaysia. Twin towers piercing the sky. Night markets thick with the smell of satay. Beaches stitched onto postcards and sold to tourists by the millions. But almost nobody sees this side of it. Because more than 400 miles across open ocean, past the reach of the mainland's highways and high-rises, there's a version of this country that most Malaysians themselves have never set foot in. Hidden beyond the tourist postcards is a completely different world. A world of longhouses instead of condos, rivers instead of roads, and a silence so total you can hear your own heartbeat. So what does it actually take to live in a place the rest of the country forgot? This isn't just another patch of jungle on a map. This is East Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, two states separated from the peninsula by the South China Sea, sitting on the island of Borneo alongside Brunei and Indonesia. This place tells a much bigger story than tropical paradise. It's a story about isolation shaping identity, about dozens of indigenous cultures who never asked to be split off from their own country, and about people building modern lives in some of the most remote terrain on Earth. Behind the beautiful scenery lies something few travelers ever experience, because most of them never leave the coastline. Start with the map, because the map is the whole problem. Peninsular Malaysia and East Malaysia aren't connected by a single road. Not one. To drive from Kuala Lumpur to Kota Kinabalu, you need a boat. This is one country, legally, politically, culturally, split by an ocean that makes popping over for a weekend a 2-hour flight instead of a 2-hour drive. Imagine if half your nation's citizens needed a plane ticket just to visit their own capital. That's not a metaphor here. That's Tuesday. But here's what most visitors never notice. The isolation didn't erase these communities. It preserved them. Deep in Sarawak's interior, along rivers like the Rejang and the Baram, longhouses still stand the way they have for generations. These aren't museum recreations. People actually live in them. Sometimes 20, 30, 40 families under one continuous roof, each with their own section, but sharing one long communal veranda that runs the entire length of the building. It's an entire village compressed into a single structure. Privacy looks different here. So does the word neighbor. Daily life in these communities runs on a different clock entirely. There's no 9 to 5 drifting past a desk. In many Iban and Bidayuh villages, the day starts before sunrise with work in the paddy fields or the rubber gardens. Fishing isn't a hobby, it's dinner. Hunting still happens with blowpipes in some of the deepest interior communities. Not for sport, but because the nearest supermarket might be a full day's journey by longboat and logging road. Modern life hasn't skipped Borneo. It's just arrived selectively. A satellite dish bolted to a longhouse roof, a smartphone charged off a generator, internet signal that flickers in and out like it's negotiating with the jungle for permission to exist. And then there's the food, which tells you everything about how a culture adapts to its environment. In Sabah, Hanava, raw fish cured in lime juice and chili, not unlike a Bornean ceviche, sits next to bambangan, a wild mango pickled with its own crush seed, a flavor so specific to this region that most Malaysians on the peninsula have never tasted it. In Sarawak, the kolomi noodle dish has become so iconic, it's basically a regional flag on a plate. Street markets called TMU pop up on fixed days in small towns, where hill tribes come down from the highlands to trade jungle produce, wild honey, and hand-woven rattan for salt, sugar, and fuel. It's not a tourist experience. It's the actual supply chain. Now, picture the landscape itself, because this is where the postcards finally earn their reputation. Mount Kinabalu rises over 13,000 feet, the highest peak between the Himalayas and New Guinea, and it's sacred to the Kadazan Dusun people, believed to be the resting place of their ancestor spirits. The rainforests here are older than the Amazon, home to orangutans, pygmy elephants, and the rafflesia, the largest flower on Earth, which can grow to nearly a meter wide and smells deliberately, unapologetically like rotting meat, just to attract the flies that pollinate it. Nature here doesn't perform for cameras. It simply exists at a scale that makes you feel, correctly, very small. At first glance, this all looks like paradise with better branding. But the real story is something completely different, because paradise, out here, Comes with a price tag most tourists never see. Cost of living in remote Sabah and Sarawak isn't cheap just because it's rural. Fuel has to be shipped or flown in. So does rice, medicine, building material, and cement. A bag of cement that costs a few ringgit in Kuala Lumpur can cost triple that in the deep interior once you factor in the boat, the truck, and the logging road that floods every rainy season. Isolation is romantic in a documentary. It's a logistical nightmare in real life. Healthcare can mean an hour by longboat just to reach the nearest clinic. And that's on a good day when the river isn't running high. This is where everything changes, though, because East Malaysians didn't wait around for the mainland to fix these problems. Communities built their own solutions. Floating clinics, mobile schools that travel by boat, telemedicine programs beaming a doctor's face into villages that don't have a road, let alone a hospital. Sabah and Sarawak have some of the fastest growing rural connectivity projects in Southeast Asia, precisely because isolation forced innovation instead of waiting for permission. Compare this to the peninsula and the contrast sharpens fast. West Malaysia gets the highways, the high-speed rail plans, the skyline everyone recognizes. East Malaysia gets left holding a different kind of wealth, cultural, ecological, and human, that the rest of the country is only now starting to take seriously. Sarawak alone is home to more than 20 distinct indigenous groups, each with its own language, its own textile patterns, its own version of what it means to belong to this land. That's not a footnote. That's one of the most concentrated pockets of cultural diversity anywhere on the planet, sitting quietly across the water from a capital city that barely thinks about it. So why should any of this matter to someone who's never been within 1,000 miles of Borneo? Because East Malaysia is a live case study in something every modern society is quietly wrestling with. How do you hold on to identity while the world outside keeps pulling you towards sameness? Every satellite dish on a longhouse roof, every smartphone charged by solar panel, every teenager fluent in both their grandmother's dialect and TikTok slang is proof that tradition and modernity don't have to cancel each other out. They can sit on the same veranda. But the future here is genuinely uncertain, and that's what makes the story worth telling now rather than later. Logging concessions keep pressing further into ancestral forest. Palm oil plantations keep expanding, trading biodiversity for export revenue. Younger generations keep leaving for cities on the peninsula, chasing university degrees and jobs the interior simply can't offer yet. There's a version of this future where longhouse culture, native languages, and rainforest ecosystems adapt and survive alongside progress. And there's another version where all of it quietly disappears under a highway that finally, after decades, connects the unconnectable, trading isolation for access and maybe losing something irreplaceable in exchange. Nobody knows yet which version wins. That uncertainty is the whole point. This isn't a place frozen in the past, waiting to be discovered. It's a place actively deciding, in real time, what it wants to become. So the next time someone says they've been to Malaysia, ask them if they've ever crossed that ocean. Ask them if they've eaten bambangan, slept under a longhouse roof, or watched Kinabalu disappear into cloud at sunset. Because there's the Malaysia everyone photographs, and then there's the one still writing its own story for 100 miles from the mainland, one river at a time. Would you cross that ocean to see it for yourself? Let us know in the comments what surprised you the most. And if you want more stories from the places most people never think to look, make sure you're subscribed, because this is only the beginning.